G'day, folks. It's Chris Gonzo Gondek here again for another NetApp Newsworthy Minute. This time we're talking about VMware and more specifically VMware in the cloud. NetApp and VMware have had a strategic alliance for many years, and we've recently made some exciting announcements. So to help us learn more about these exciting announcements, I'm delighted to introduce you to my guest today, Alex de Gruyter, who's Staff Cloud Architect at VMware. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks very much, Gonzo. It's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Hey, Alex, I'll start off by asking, tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at VMware.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in technology for the best part of, kind of 30 years now. So it makes me feel a little bit old, but I did start building computers with my dad once upon a time. So awesome. I have worked for customers, for partners, for SIs, and I guess in the last 7 or 8 years, I found the golden land that is vendor land. So that's sort of where I've landed now. So I'm an SA. I've been in pre-sales for the best part of 10 to 15 years in various product roles and whatnot.
Fantastic. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about VMware and public clouds? I think we've seen this huge rush to leverage the services offered by hyperscalers, but more specifically, I'm hearing about VMware Cloud with Amazon Web Services, Azure VMware Service with Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud VMware Engine with Google Cloud Platform. This is pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess like if you look at the history, especially in sort of Australia and New Zealand, we were pretty early adopters of virtualization in general. And Gonzo, I know you were running GSX, so you're sort of an old hat at this stuff. Like VMware has such high penetration in market, and people have invested in like people and processes and tools and management systems to manage their VMware infrastructure. And what we saw kind of, I guess it sort of happened certainly in the last, I would say it's accelerated like the last 7 or 8 years, is people are adopting, as you sort of mentioned, like a lot more public cloud services and looking to move to the hyperscalers to get all those buzzwords that they can mark their career on, like things like IoT and AI and machine learning and all that good stuff that's in the cloud. But all of their traditional workloads have been built on VMware infrastructure. And so rather than sort of pick those virtual machines up and put those in EC2 rather, or Azure virtual machines or dumping those into Google Compute, what VMware did initially with AWS, and we've worked with the other hyperscalers now like Azure and Google and Oracle and Alibaba actually, is work out ways to actually host that VMware infrastructure as is on the cloud. And that's been really palatable to a lot of customers, because rather than having to stand up individual teams and build new processes and even like use a new language when you're in the public cloud, you can use the traditional sort of VMware-based infrastructure, people, teams, and then supplement and rather than replace what you have, add to and enhance your VMware footprint with some of those cloud services.
Yeah, look, you raise a really important point there around user experience, right? I think a lot of folks have really invested a lot of time, effort, skills over decades now, leveraging this technology. As we were talking earlier, I am a self-confessed VMware fanboy, and I've been running VMware for over a decade myself. But speaking of over a decade, NetApp and VMware, we've had a strategic alliance for over a decade, but most recently we've kind of significantly bolstered that relationship with the announcement of supporting these VMware in cloud offerings, and more specifically by providing the ability to use NetApp native storage capabilities with VMware in the clouds. I'm keen to understand your thoughts on this and what you think the benefits are for our partners and customers.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think it's I decided that I wasn't going to use platitudes and kind of emotive language as part of like before the session, but it is a real game changer. And what I mean by that is anybody who's worked with hyperconverged infrastructure knows that in order to grow any part, whether it's memory or your CPU or your storage, you need to add more nodes. And when VMware Cloud on AWS was kind of created, almost 5 years ago now, or sort of the announcement was made, in order to add additional capacity, especially for storage workloads, our response was add more nodes. And like that's that's a tricky conversation when a customer's like, well, what, I don't need more compute. And we're like, yeah, no, we know, just add more nodes and you can have it for future use. But it doesn't really make sense. Like, it's really hard to have that conversation with customers. And especially what we'll often do with customers is we'll do like an analysis of their environment. And we typically use things like RV Tools is one that we actually do the analysis on. I know we're getting a little bit in the weeds here, but we'll see often there'll be there'll be like a file server that's like really, really big, or a backup server that's really, really big. And we'll say, oh, well, you can move all like that thing I said before about, hey, you can move your VMware footprint into the cloud. You can, except for that server. And then customers are like, oh, that's a bit hard. Like now I have to revisit my backup technology. Oh, and we're like, oh no, don't move the file server. Use an AWS native service. And they're like, oh, that's a bit hard. It all gets hard and it all gets more difficult. And so I think
forcing unnecessary change sometimes, right?
Yeah, exactly right. And it's like customers are looking at VMware Cloud on AWS not because maybe they want to innovate, maybe they want to change some things. More often than not, they just want to move quickly. And as soon as you add those, we can move most of your estate, but that 10%, why don't you transform? It's hard, annoying conversations. We do a lot of work with public sector organizations. We're actually doing some joint work at the moment, and having that conversation, they want to move those virtual machines without changing anything. They don't even want to tell their users. They don't want to tell their downstream business units they're actually moving. They just want to do it. And as soon as we say, oh yeah, no, you can move to VMC, but then you have to transform those couple of workloads. It's really hard. So I think being able to present, especially being able to present those data stores, and that's something that we've got coming on VMware Cloud and AWS and Google in the future as well, and also is already there on AVS, so the Azure-based offering, is really exciting.
Fantastic. Hey, you're talking about moving VMs, and I'm very conscious of the fact that we, both of us, NetApp and VMware, we haven't forgotten about our customers and partners that are still using quite heavily VMware on premises. In fact, I'd say this is the first opportunity that I've seen for a real hybrid cloud experience where, we used to enjoy some of the features of just VMware between data centers. My mind exploded the first time I saw vMotion. And then when storage vMotion came out and you could jump data stores while, the system just remains online as you migrate. We can now do this between the data center and the cloud, especially what we were talking about earlier from a user experience perspective. Is there any other exciting stuff or features we can unlock now that we have native VMware in cloud?
Are there any other? So on the migration front, I've got a customer at the moment. They're moving 2,000. So there's different ways you can move a virtual machine. So you can move it with, we call it bulk migration, but it's a bit of a misnomer. It's 1+, so it's any number of virtual machines. And that's like a vSphere replication where you do a failover into the cloud. There's another one, you can do cross vCenter vMotion, which is why it's named cross center vMotion. But then there's also there's replication assisted vMotion, which is the best of both worlds. It does the bulk, but then it does the deltas. There's some challenges because you need a lot of bandwidth to be able to do that and so forth. I'm trying to convince this customer at the moment that that's a bad idea to do that for 2,000 VMs, that they should use bulk migration. My problem is it keeps working. And so they're like,
I can't argue with it if it's working, right?
Exactly right. So they're like, oh, we hear you. We're definitely not going to do it. And then I find out that the week later they've moved all these VMs with RAV again. So that's the one. I'll say on migration, we call it we've called it unaffectionately the Hotel California. If you migrate into one of the native clouds,
you can check in, but you can never check out.
Yeah, exactly right. It's not that easy. It's really easy to get in. You can use things like Azure Site Recovery to get into Azure virtual machines really easily. It's not impossible to get back, but it's not as easy. So being able to extend those networks and then migrate them in. The other thing I will say that I like about the fact that it's NetApp data stores in the cloud is lots of customers that we work with have a large NetApp footprint, and they've built their backup and recovery and restoration procedures around that, things like using SnapMirror and so forth.
Fantastic.
So to be able to use those same technologies in the cloud is really enlightening, I think.
Fantastic. So look, finally, is there any advice that you have for our partners and customers out there that are planning their VMware cloud journeys and adoption and migration? You've got a couple of great points that you just mentioned there. Any kind of final words of advice?
I think that there's probably any words of advice. Like what I would say is that like your decision isn't final. And what I mean by that is that because you can have a VMware footprint on any number of different clouds, whichever cloud you pick today doesn't need to be like, it's not a permanent decision. It's not like a marriage. Like you can break up and in the future you can use a different cloud. There's also, like, we talk a lot about the promise of multi-cloud. And that sounds really, really good. There's some challenges associated with that around operationalizing those different clouds. Like, because all of those additional services. So as you start to use the native services, you need to consider, what's
the different ecosystems at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, different. You're right. Different ecosystems, different partners, different fault restoration procedures. So, like multi-cloud is really good, and there's minimum viable footprints for a VCF hyperconverged infrastructure. So, like most customers in our market will actually use one particular cloud, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be with that cloud for forever.
Awesome.
What would be the other thing I would say is like, they really consider what your security profile is. Lots of our customers will extend all their networks and then they'll hairpin all their traffic on-prem. And we have ways that can make that a little bit better. But yeah, the network needs to be really well planned out.
Oh,
it's always the network's fault. As a previous network guy, it's always the network's fault.
Oh, it's always DNS as well, right?
Network, DNS, and storage. So I empathize with you guys.
That's it. Alex, mate, I really appreciate you taking the time to come out and talk to us today and talk about the the exciting benefits of NetApp now having a presence of being able to provide not just guest access to NetApp storage in cloud, but that data store capability is going to unlock a bunch of new features for NetApp customers and partners and potential prospects out there. And can't wait to talk to you again. Hopefully we might get one of the hyperscalers in and get them to tell us about what they're seeing with VMware cloud adoption as well. So Alex, thanks again and all the best.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gonzo.